Hi everyone, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. In tonight's 49th session of our exploration of J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World, we catch up with Harry's bath time adventures, and then face the second task in the Triwizard Tournament. I have 16 slides to discuss tonight. I have 16 slides to discuss tonight in the course of the next 90 minutes because I also have to accompany those 16 slides a pretty hard out at 10:30 local time. So that means that I have about 5 minutes to discuss each slide. We're going to move quickly tonight because I have been falling behind week by week here at Dear Mr. Potter. There's just so much to discuss that I have not been able to maintain my original schedule at all. And I want to kind of try and exert some control here, try and take the reins of this rampaging beast and bring it back into some semblance of order. So we're going to try and do that tonight, but we'll see. It seems less than likely, actually, that we're going to make it all the way to the end of the second task, but who can say for sure? Certainly, I'm not going to get closer to that goal by wasting time here at the top, though I will observe before we begin that Wilhelm Scream says in the chat that a session entitled Gillyweed is maybe 10 days early. That is to say, for those of you who are not up on your weed parlance, that it should be dropped on 420. See, it's a good joke. It's a pretty good joke. But since the only alternate title that occurred to me for tonight's session was The Shape of Water, and I figured that that would be making some promises that I have no intention upon delivering. I have no intention of delivering upon, I suppose I should say. I went with Gillyweed instead. I think that's the safer choice, right? That's the safer choice. Let's get into it then with Chapter 25, The Egg and the Eye, which, as is the order of things here at Dear Mr. Potter, I was supposed to discuss last week. Let's pick up with Harry preparing for his bath. Here on the eve of the second task, he finally decides to take Cedric Diggory's advice and go take a bath. As Harry had no idea how long a bath he would need to work out the secret of the golden egg, he decided to do it at night, when he would be able to take as much time as he wanted. Reluctant though he was to accept more favors from Cedric, he also decided to use the prefect's bathroom. Far fewer people were allowed in there, so it was much less likely that he would be disturbed. Harry planned his excursion carefully, because he'd been caught out of bed and out of bounds by Filch the caretaker in the middle of the night once before, and had no desire to repeat the experience. The invisibility cloak would, of course, be essential, and as an added precaution, Harry thought he would take the Marauder's map, which next to the cloak was the most useful aid to rule-breaking Harry owned. The map showed the whole of Hogwarts, including its many shortcuts and secret passageways, and most importantly of all, it revealed the people inside the castle as minuscule labelled dots, moving around the corridors so that Harry would be forewarned if somebody was approaching the bathroom. Obviously, the Marauder's map is going to be terribly significant at the end of the chapter as we get the showdown between Snape and Moody, which I know many of you have been looking forward to for quite some time. There are a couple of really interesting details here, of course. The first is that Harry is reluctant to take more favors from Cedric Diggory. This shows Harry's emotional state at the moment and his envy of Cedric Diggory, I suppose, his jealousy toward the romantic entanglement with Cho Chang that Cedric Diggory is currently enjoying. At least we can speculate that Cedric Diggory is continuing to enjoy that romantic entanglement after the events of the Yule Ball. But Harry is reluctant to make himself submissive to Cedric Diggory in this moment, despite the fact that the information about the prefect's bathroom was given to him along with the information about the egg, along with this clue that he should take a long bath with it and try to figure out the secret message encoded within the egg. Harry is still suffering from a great deal of envy of Cedric Diggory at this point and doesn't want to pursue that avenue any further. This is a reluctance that is entirely born, I think, of Harry's personal enmity here with Cedric Diggory rather than any grander sense of fair play or of justice, which we absolutely highlight in that next paragraph when he's talking about taking the invisibility cloak and the Marauder's map. The Marauder's map, which next to the cloak was the most useful aid to rule-breaking Harry owned. No, I've actually got quite a toolkit now of implements to aid in the breaking of rules here at Hogwarts, so I'm going to take the two big guns. I'm going to take the invisibility cloak and I'm going to take the Marauder's map. Hey, let's go break some rules. That's what they're for, after all. And this, of course, dovetails beautifully with our discussion on rule-breaking at Hogwarts and the positive association that we have with rule-breaking at Hogwarts, which we discussed in last week's session. So Harry decides to go off to the prefect's bathroom, following the advice given him by one Cedric Diggory, and we meet an old friend, I suppose is the most charitable way that I can put this, as we transition to Harry's bath time adventure. Harry stretched out his arms, lifted the egg in his wet hands and opened it. The wailing, screeching sound filled the bathroom, echoing and reverberating off the marble walls, but it sounded just as incomprehensible as ever, if not more so with all the echoes. He snapped it shut again, worried that the sound would attract Filch, wondering whether that hadn't been Cedric's plan. And then, making him jump so badly that he dropped the egg, which clattered away across the bathroom floor, someone spoke. "I'd try putting it in the water if I were you." Harry had swallowed a considerable amount of bubbles in shock. He stood up, sputtering, and saw the ghost of a very glum-looking girl sitting cross-legged on top of one of the taps. It was moaning Myrtle, who was usually to be heard sobbing in the S-bend of a toilet 3 floors below. "Myrtle!" Harry said in outrage. I'm not wearing anything." The foam was so dense that this hardly mattered, but he had a nasty feeling that Myrtle had been spying on him from out of one of the taps ever since he had arrived. "I closed my eyes when you got in," she said, blinking at him through her thick spectacles. "You haven't been to see me for ages." "Yeah, well," said Harry, bending his knees slightly just to make absolutely sure Myrtle couldn't see anything but his head. "I'm not supposed to come into your bathroom, am I? It's a girl's one." "You didn't used to care," said Myrtle miserably. "You used to be in there all the time." This was true, though only because Harry, Ron, and Hermione had found Myrtle's out-of-order toilets a convenient place to brew Polyjuice Potion in secret, a forbidden potion that had turned him and Ron into living replicas of Crabbe and Goyle for an hour so they could sneak into the Slytherin common room. Myrtle Elizabeth Warren, welcome back to the pages of the Harry Potter saga after an extended absence. Myrtle does not appear at all in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban. We remember her, of course, from the events of the Chamber of Secrets, and she will show up once more in Half-Blood Prince before we are done with her for the series, I suppose, before that's a series wrap on Moaning Myrtle. I appreciate very much, and we talked about this last time too, with regard to the Yule Ball and the trysting couples in the rose bushes outside after the Yule Ball had concluded, or after the Yule Ball had reached its climax, I suppose, which is, now that I think about it, perhaps an unfortunate turn of phrase. We talked about the trysting couples, and we talked about the way that J.K. Rowling manages to direct the narrative away from matters sexual. There's a certain amount of romance, and there's a certain amount of kissing, and there's a certain amount of that aforementioned, emotional entanglement in the pages of Harry Potter, but less than we might expect for children of this stormy and tumultuous and, I dare say, tumescent adolescence, right? This is not going to be a path that we explore with a great deal of naturalism, I suppose, in the pages of Harry Potter. And here we see JKR doing one of her classic kind of sidesteps here. Harry is uncomfortable at the thought that Moaning Myrtle could have seen him naked, scandalous though that would have been, but we are immediately reassured. The foam was so dense that this hardly mattered, but he had a nasty feeling that Myrtle had been spying on him from out of one of the taps ever since he had arrived, and then he bends his knees still further, which is a ambiguous motion, I suppose, bending his knees so he is lower in the water and so Myrtle can only see his head. This is what is assured to us by the narrative voice here, but also, of course, bending his knees to protect any possible glimpse of any other part of Harry Potter in which Moaning Myrtle might be interested. So this is our introduction to a character who is going to fulfill a fascinating narrative function in the context of the second task. Moaning Myrtle's presence here in the prefect's bathroom, and then later in the lake, as Harry is actually competing in the second task, is an interesting one. She is there to provide a certain perspective, but it is absolutely a perspective which respects, which acknowledges, which reinforces Harry's position as the protagonist of this series. She shows up in a supporting role in a way that she doesn't, in a way that characters like Cedric Diggory or characters like Mad-Eye Moody do not. Harry can take advice from people. Harry can take clues from people. Harry can be informed by his supporting cast, but Moaning Myrtle's presence here is slightly different. She is there to aid and augment Harry while never actually offering a perspective of her own, if that follows. Let me see in the chat here how we're getting along. It was like no bubble bath Harry had ever experienced, quotes C-Star. Did he experience bubble baths elsewhere? Well, I was wondering about the bathroom facilities at Hogwarts, right? I mean, everything in the castle of Hogwarts itself is pretty spectacularly appointed, like pretty luxuriously appointed by the standards of the Muggle world, at least. I see no reason to believe that there aren't bubble baths in or near the Gryffindor dormitories. That seems like something you would definitely want for a group of adolescents, right? I mean, particularly after they've been out trudging through the forest with Hagrid in the latest Care of Magical Creatures class. So I'm sure that Harry has enjoyed and appreciated other bubble baths in the context of Hogwarts, probably not in the context of the Dursleys, right? I can't imagine that that's something that Vernon Dursley would have furnished Harry with during his tenure there, but this is something that Harry has by direct implication, I suppose, this is something that Harry has experienced before, but not in this circumstance, not with this kind of grandeur, not with this kind of grandiosity. And the existence of the prefect's bathroom itself, the detail, the opulent detail of the prefect's bathroom itself reinforces some of the things that we've been discussing over the course of the last few weeks here on Dear Mr. Potter. The idea that to be elevated in one's social standing is to receive a kind of societally sanctioned reward. We assume that prefects are going to have the nicest bathrooms. There is no actual functional requirement for prefects to have this staggeringly opulent bathroom that belongs just to them, in which Harry can be pretty confident he is not going to be disturbed because of the small number of prefects at Hogwarts in the first place, right? this is absolutely a indication of the reward that will be given you for obeying the rules of your society, for excelling within the bounds of your particular society. This is something that is pushed against by characters like Dumbledore and Minerva McGonagall because they exist in a kind of fractional and partial opposition to that notion. They are here, quote unquote, for the right reasons. They are not here for the reward of the thing. But there are people in the wizarding world who seek to rise up through the ranks so that they can be rewarded with status and with physical rewards, like a lovely plush bathroom, or with, a padded government salary, that kind of thing, right? And I'm thinking of Percy Weasley, most notably, of course. Did Percy make use of the prefect's bathroom? Oh, I guarantee he did, on a pretty constant basis, right? I imagine he wielded that key to the executive washroom with a great deal of pride and that sense of well-deserved privilege. This is a thing that Percy Weasley gets to do because he is exceptional in so many ways. So the existence of the prefect's bathroom itself is a fascinating one. Tells us things about the wizarding world, and Harry going to the prefect's bathroom in order to crack the mystery of this egg. Well, in fact, let's move on to our next slide so that we can take a look directly at the song and what this tells us about Harry's experience here. Harry took a great breath and slid under the surface, and now sitting on the marble bottom of the bubble-filled bath, he heard a chorus of eerie voices singing to him from his open egg in his hands. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground, and while you're searching ponder this, we've taken what you'll sorely miss, an hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took, and past an hour the prospect's black, too late, it's gone, it won't come back. Harry let himself float back upward and broke the bubbly surface, shaking his hair out of his eyes. Hear it? Said Myrtle. Yeah. Come seek us where our voices sound, and if I need persuading... Hang on, I need to listen again. He sank back beneath the water. It took 3 more underwater renditions of the egg song before Harry had it memorized. Then he trod water for a while, thinking hard, where Myrtle sat and watched him. Classic iambic tetrameter. This is a pretty clean and precise bit of poetry from JKR. An unusual bit of poetry from JKR, actually. There just isn't that much poetry to be found in the pages of Harry Potter. There aren't that many songs. The only songs which I think we've covered with any depth at all, in fact, are the Sorting Hat songs, which are similarly simple, I suppose, and that's sounding like a backhanded compliment, I suppose, similarly elemental in their construction. But this tight iambic tetrameter, you can hear that stress-unstressed pattern, right? Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground. That is perfect iambic tetrameter, and she manages to maintain it pretty thoroughly throughout. We've taken what you'll sorely miss, an hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took. I guess the stress on the to in that line is maybe a little soft in terms of like classic iambic tetrameter, but it works well enough. And I think that the essence of the poem is really quite beautiful. So the realization of the poem, the realization of the clue, of the song of the merfolk, I suppose, merpeople as they refer to in Harry Potter, but my folkloric instincts want me to refer to them as merfolk pretty consistently throughout, which we'll talk about in just a moment too. The discovery of this song in the context of the prefect's bathroom is a really provocative thing in the pages of Harry Potter, because it is caused by 2 distinct forces in Harry's life, the confluence of 2 distinct forces in Harry's life, one of which is presently uncomfortable, but is not generally uncomfortable, and the other of which is generally uncomfortable and not presently uncomfortable. I am talking in the first instance about his relationship with Cedric Diggory, right? In the frame of Harry Potter, we're actually very enthusiastic about friends helping friends be better friends. We're very enthusiastic about relying on our communities, on relying on those people with greater or separate or additional skills than we ourselves possess in order to resolve imminent problems, in order to resolve imminent dangers, in order to do good in the world. Harry leans all the time on his friends, most notably, of course, Hermione and Ron, but also the expanded cast, also Sirius Black and Hagrid and Dobby, as we're going to see in just a few pages' time. So that instinct is generally positive, but in this particular instance, somewhat negative, because Harry has these complicated feelings about Cedric Diggory and the taking of favors, even though in this specific instance, that is Cedric choosing to share this information is an act of recognizable nobility and decency, as we discussed in last week's reading, when Cedric actually passes this information on to Harry in the first place. So that is a good thing, which feels a little less good right now. And then we have the prefect's bathroom, which is a more dubious thing in general, this reward for conforming perfectly to one's society, this sits uncomfortably with the stress that we've been putting on rule breaking at Hogwarts, right? Harry is breaking the rules in order to be here. He has no right to be here. He is co-opting the privilege afforded others who do not break the rules at Hogwarts in the way that Harry Potter does. And yet, in this instance, we're perfectly comfortable with that. There's no acknowledgement that Harry feels uncomfortable within the frame of this scene, this sequence, this experience, or, geographically speaking, the prefect's bathroom. These two things come into sharp confluence here in order to yield the clue for the second task, which is going to spark Harry, of course, returning to the library and frantically searching for, well, interestingly, frantically searching for everything that he can find to bring him closer to resolution with regard to the second task, right? He is going to desperately try and find some means of existing beneath the surface of the lake for an hour in order to accomplish the task that is vaguely suggested here at this point in the story. But he isn't at any point going to research merpeople. He isn't at any point going to crack open a book that will tell him, hey, these are what the merfolk who live in the lake at Hogwarts look like. And that opens up a space for an interesting reveal later, and it's a particularly interesting reveal because it does something that J.K. Rowling rarely does. J.K. Rowling, in the frame of Harry Potter, generally doesn't make direct reference to the huge wave of folklore and fantasy that has informed her work, both consciously and subconsciously, right? We've talked about this with regard to the depiction of goblins. We've talked about this with regard to the depiction of house elves. We've talked about this with dragons and centaurs and the depiction of magic itself, right? The whole wizarding world is informed by, well, 100 years of what we would think of as modern fantasy and 1,000 years of what we would think of as Western European folklore, right? Emerging from the Middle Ages. J.K. Rowling doesn't normally frame her specific fictional creation in the context of what is expected from a fantasy story, what is expected from a fairy tale story. But she does with specific regard to the merpeople. Because here in the prefect's bathroom, we have the mermaid, right? We get the depiction of the classic Hans Christian Andersen, Ariel from The Little Mermaid. She is there and she is beautiful and she is resplendent and she is a figure of hope and of positive magic. And that is not going to be Harry's experience when he gets beneath the surface of the lake, right? We're going to invert that expectation really rather beautifully. But here Harry gets, without the narrative drawing any real attention to it, either here or in the subsequent dream that Harry has, which we'll talk about in just a few slides' time, without the narrative drawing any specific attention to our suppositions, I suppose, about mermaids specifically and merfolk in general in the magical world of Harry Potter, we get that really effective subversion when we meet the merfolk beneath the surface of the lake on the Hogwarts grounds. Mermaids are fascinating. And I'm saying mermaids here, I'm gendering that, and I'm kind of uncomfortable in the gendering of that because Harry Potter in particular does such a nice job of not gendering that, but I'm gendering it in the folkloric sense because for the longest time, the history of merfolk, of merpeople, was the history of mermaids, right? Mermaids specifically are attested to in ancient Mesopotamia, right? There are stories of mermaids that go back 3,500 to 4,000 years in our shared cultural history. There are mermaid stories in pretty much every part of the world. There are mermaid stories in every major mythic tradition that informs the modern world. You will find stories of sea creatures of some sort, some kind of half fish, half human, I was going to say subterranean, but of course that is not the word that I'm looking for. Suboceanic, I suppose, race of sentient, sapient beings down there. And of course, it has been often observed that the consensus now in the modern analysis of folklore, of course, is that merfolk derive from sailors sighting manatees or other types of aquatic creatures and misconstruing their human-like proportions at a distance as being people. Which is, kind of a flat answer, I suppose. I'm not necessarily swayed by that. I don't necessarily believe that we have to have a literal explanation for the spontaneous emergence, the coincidental emergence of mermaids as a symbol, as a metaphor of folklore all across the globe, because it's not as though we have a neat and flat explanation for the existence of elves or of goblins or of fairies in different mythic traditions all over the planet. But we do have those things, right? Mermaids just have a very neat and tight explanation. And I am reluctant to attribute the metaphorical power of mermaids, the symbolic power of mermaids, to a simple misunderstanding about some creatures that live in the sea. That doesn't seem to me to be entirely warranted or entirely rewarded as a piece of folkloric deconstruction, I suppose. But all the same, we've got this rich tradition of mermaids all over the world that absolutely informs Western European folklore, coming up through Hans Christian Andersen, up to Walt Disney, and then into the modern world, I suppose. We'll get, of course, to merpeople in just a moment. We should pay close attention to the content of the poem, though. We are going to stress over the course of the next chapter, as we get into the second task itself, the danger that Harry believes awaits the hostages, I suppose is the best word, that are taken by the merfolk, right? Harry believes that if he doesn't rescue these individuals during the appointed hour, during the time limit of the second task, that they will die, right? That they will be taken forever. And I wanted to stress an interesting bit of semantic ambiguity right here at the end of the song that comes from the egg. An hour long you'll have to look and to recover what we took, but past an hour the prospect's black. Too late, it's gone, it won't come back. It is possible, as Harry does, to interpret this as meaning that after the hour has elapsed, the thing that they took will be gone and won't come back. But I think it's also possible to look at this a little more generously and to acknowledge the in fiction ambiguity of it, right? This song has been crafted with a purpose, that is to give the champions of the Triwizard Tournament a clue, but not to tell them everything, and to exert a certain emotional stress, because the second task, as we talked about before, is in large part an emotional challenge. We talked about how the three challenges break down before, that the first challenge is anchored in this notion of ethos, that it is anchored in this notion of action and of agency and of personal courage and bravery. How do you face the dragon? Well, you face the dragon. That's how you do it. What are we testing here in the second task? Well, not just courage, because that could be handled by, well, you have to swim down into the domain of the merfolk and retrieve an artifact of some sort. Go get a crystal, go get one of their tridents, and then come back to the surface. We could do that, but instead we apply this extra leverage that it is a beloved hostage is being held down there beneath the icy waves, the icy waters of the lake on the Hogwarts grounds. And that changes the entire texture of the second task here. It draws us more into a pathetic realm, I suppose. This is the pathos test. And ultimately, of course, in the third challenge, we're going to have the labyrinth, which is a brilliant encapsulation of a logos-oriented test, I suppose, a test oriented toward rationalism and logic and intellectualism, I suppose. But this is the emotional test. So that ambiguity is absolutely necessary. The alleged ambiguity, the ambiguity that I am alleging exists within the frame of this poem, that is necessary for exerting the right kind of emotional pressure on the champions. An hour long you'll have to look and to recover what we took, but past an hour the prospect's black, too late, it's gone, it won't come back. Yes, it is possible that the thing that is gone and won't come back is the thing that they took, to recover what we took, right? Whatever it is that they have seized from Harry's life, this beloved thing that will be the focal point of the second test. But it is also possible to interpret the it in that last line, the ambiguous it in that last line, not as the hostage, not as the thing that was taken, but rather the prospect itself. The prospect, that is to say, the existence of hope, right? The existence of possibility, I suppose, more than hope even, right? The possibility is black. Too late, it's gone, it won't come back. If you fail within the span of the hour, it is the possibility of victory that is gone and won't come back. That ambiguity, I like to believe, is completely intentional. I think that it leverages the emotional weight that is necessary for the champions as they move into the second task. More on that later, believe you me, when we talk about the actual selection process for the hostages, because that's a little bit complicated. But also it is ambiguous enough that we can choose to believe that the task is not outright lying to Harry and the other champions. Let me see as I catch up with the chat again. As Gretchen is saying, Gretchen, I'm glad that you joined us. It's not just an emotional challenge, it's a challenge to his community in Harry's mind, right? But that connection of community is fundamentally an emotional one. It is leveraging emotional bonds in a way that the first task did not, and in a way that the third task will not. This is I would argue, the distinctly emotional task. I don't know that that's necessarily intentional. I'm not sure that J.K. Rowling crafted these three tasks with the intent of exploring that ethos, logos, pathos dynamic that we've observed so often in the form of our power trio, and of course replicated throughout the pages of the Harry Potter series. But it has played out pretty naturally and pretty beautifully. Because without the hostage component, this is not, I would argue, an ethos task. This is just very similar to the first task. In fact, you are being presented with a challenge which you must overcome through your use of magic and your own personal ingenuity and courage, I suppose. Those two things, of course, which Harry continues to have in spades. Let's keep pushing on here to see the aftermath of Harry's revelation. Out in the dark corridor, Harry examined the Marauder's map to check that the coast was still clear. Yes, the dots belonging to Filch and his cat, Mrs. Norris, were safely in their office. Nothing else seemed to be moving apart from Peeves, though he was bouncing around the trophy room on the floor above. Harry had taken his first step back toward Gryffindor Tower when something else on the map caught his eye, something distinctly odd. Peeves was not the only thing that was moving. A single dot was flitting around a room in the bottom left-hand corner, Snape's office. But the dot wasn't labelled Severus Snape. It was Bartemius Crouch. Harry stared at the dot. Mr. Crouch was supposed to be too ill to go to work or to come to the Yule Ball, so what was he doing sneaking into Hogwarts at 1 o'clock in the morning? Harry watched closely as the dot moved around and around the room, pausing here and there. Harry hesitated, thinking, and then his curiosity got the better of him. He turned and set off in the opposite direction toward the nearest staircase. He was going to go and see what Crouch was up to. Harry walked down the stairs as quietly as possible, though the faces in some of the portraits still turned curiously at the squeak of a floorboard, the rustle of his pajamas. He crept along the corridor below, pushed aside a tapestry about halfway along, and proceeded down a narrower staircase, a shortcut that would take him down 2 floors. He kept glancing down at the map, wondering, it just didn't seem in character, somehow, for correct, law-abiding Mr. Crouch to be sneaking around somebody else's office this late at night. J.K. Rowling has said on more than one occasion that the creation of the Marauder's map in the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban was one of the greatest headaches that she suffered, one of the greatest obstacles that she overcame in the writing of the rest of the series. Because you guys, once you have the Marauder's map, well, a lot of problems are pretty trivially resolved. A lot of mysteries become immediately transparent. We have to go a certain distance toward, well, the construction of some pretty effective scaffolding in order to shield the mystery that is at the heart of this novel from Harry, tangentially, and also, most importantly, from the reader. We're going to be dealing with some very convenient naming choices. Some naming choices that, if they had not been made at a previous time in the Wizarding world, would have blown the mystery wide open right here, right? This is a weird kind of plot convenient but ultimately destructive kind of contrivance and convenience at the heart of the plotting of this novel. And I know that this is one of the elements that generally disturbs. So people who don't like the Goblet of Fire will oftentimes cite this naming convention and the use of the Marauder's map as reasons why they are not compelled by the plot of the story. I have to say that it doesn't really bother me that much. It would have been stranger, I think, to have had the Marauder's map disappear between Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire. We are going to hand off the Marauder's map in a way which I find actually rather emotionally and logically satisfying in just a few slides' time. I like the way that we resolve this outstanding problem, and I like the weight that it has here in the shape of the story. Nikki says, interestingly here in the chat, the thing about Harry is that he's always been in a fight or flight mode. When he lived with the Dursleys, he was constantly trying to survive, avoiding all manner of abuse at home and at school. When he arrives at Hogwarts, he has to fight for his life and to protect his friends and community every year. So his thinking is not like others' thinking. Nikki, that is a really interesting perspective, I think, on Harry's innate heroism, right? And the degree to which Harry's exceptionalism is innate and the degree to which it is a learned behavior, the degree to which it is a learned response. Because it's very easy to think of Harry as, okay, the first page of Harry's book is he was born to two loving and adoring parents. The second page is he was the boy who lived. The third page is he went to Hogwarts and broke all the rules and saved the day pretty much once a year for 7 years, in fact. But that's not the Harry Potter story. Because between pages 2 and 3 in that book, there is a long period in which Harry is oppressed and exiled from community, in which Harry has to resort to his own agency and his own sense of himself, right? Harry's identity has been forged in fire. Harry has been through an identity crucible in a way that very few characters in this series have. I think that when we talk about Harry's exceptionalism and we talk about his eagerness to take action, his eagerness to exhibit those virtues that we associate with the ethical character, I suppose, in the sense of ethos rather than in the sense of morality, I suppose. When we associate these things with Harry, we must remember that, yes, for the longest time, for 10 years of his life, in fact, he had to be phenomenally self-reliant and phenomenally sure of who he was. It would have been trivial. It would have been completely expected, in fact, for Harry to buckle under the odious pressure of the Dursleys, or to believe the lies that he had been told about himself and about his parents and about his nature and about his life in the broadest possible sense, right? If your heart breaks thinking about 11-year-old Harry living under the stairs, think about 6-year-old Harry. Think about 4-year-old Harry. What the hell was he going through when he was that age before he was able to generate autonomously this sense of identity, or to hold to these pillars of identity which were passed on to him despite the Dursleys' assaults? It is pretty heartbreaking. But yes, I think that you're absolutely right, Nikki, in that we can understand Harry a lot, to a much greater degree, I think. Understand Harry as a character and Harry as a focal point of this narrative to a much greater degree if we remember those years that he spent with the Dursleys in effective exile, right? Cut off from community. Yeah. Let's keep moving. Oh, before we move on, I wanted to talk a little about Bartimaeus Crouch. I wanted to talk a little about the name, which comes from the biblical name Bartimaeus, who was a blind man. He had been blind for all of his life until Jesus heals him of his blindness. And of course, we might see a connection there between good old Barty Crouch and a figure who is blind to what is happening until a moment of sudden revelation gives him sight. More on that later. Though, interestingly, crouch also in the Middle English tradition does not come from the, the verb to lower oneself closer to the earth, I suppose. It's actually a corruption of the word cross, right? It comes from a kind of a tangential kind of evolutionary branch of the word that brings us to crucifix, right? To go back to the old Latin. That's where crouch comes from. It means cross. So we have a figure that is named for a biblical figure where we deal with issues of sight and understanding and then the revelatory healing of those things. And also we're connecting to crosses in his name too, which is interestingly, probably not intentionally, but interestingly, religiously charged, theologically charged at least. Let's move on to the appearance here of Mad Eye Moody. Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. Moody could see through invisibility cloaks. He alone could see the full strangeness of the scene. Snape in his nightshirt, Filch clutching the egg, and he, Harry, trapped in the stairs behind them. Moody's lopsided gash of a mouth opened in surprise. For a few seconds, he and Harry stared straight into each other's eyes. Then Moody closed his mouth and turned his blue eye upon Snape again. "Did I hear that correctly, Snape?" he asked slowly. "Someone broke into your office." "It is unimportant," said Snape coldly. "On the contrary," growled Moody, "it's very important. Who'd want to break into your office?" "A student, I dare say," said Snape. Harry could see a vein flickering horribly on Snape's greasy temple. "It has happened before. Potion ingredients have gone missing from my private store cupboard. Students attempting illicit mixtures, no doubt." "Reckon they were after potion ingredients, eh?" said Moody. "Not hiding anything else in your office, are you?" Harry saw the edge of Snape's sallow face turn a nasty brick color, the vein in his temple pulsing more rapidly. "You know I'm hiding nothing, Moody," he said in a soft and dangerous voice, "as you've searched my office pretty thoroughly yourself." Moody's face twisted into a smile. "Orders privilege, Snape. Dumbledore told me to keep an eye." "Dumbledore happens to trust me," said Snape through clenched teeth. "I refuse to believe that he gave you orders to search my office." "Course Dumbledore trusts you," growled Moody. "He's a trusting man, isn't he? Believes in second chances. But me, I say there are spots that don't come off, Snape. Spots that never come off. Do you know what I mean?" Snape suddenly did something very strange. He seized his left forearm convulsively with his right hand, as though something on it had hurt him. Something on his left forearm, you say? Interesting. We'll probably get a little more information in that in due course. What is most appealing, what is most enchanting, what is most fascinating about this conversation between Moody and Snape, of course, besides the physical absurdity of it, as Harry rightly points out in that first paragraph, how strange this must be, right? Snape in his nightshirt, Filch holding the egg, and Harry kind of crouching on the stairs behind them, trying not to be seen, even though he's wearing his invisibility cloak, struggling not to move because of how much trouble he would be in if he were discovered here and now. What's most interesting here for me, though, is this acknowledgement of something that was introduced in last week's reading. What is it that makes Dumbledore a good man? Remember Hagrid talking about this after Rita Skeeter's awful expose in the pages of the Daily Prophet? What makes Dumbledore a good man, as Hagrid tells us, is that he is willing to extend a second chance, is that he is always willing to extend that virtue of belief, that virtue of faith. He is willing to extend the possibility of redemption to pretty much everyone. And here we get another, but by no means incompatible perspective on it, right? Dumbledore happens to trust me, said Snape through clenched teeth. I refuse to believe that he gave you orders to search my office. Course Dumbledore trusts you, growled Moody. He's a trusting man, isn't he? Believes in second chances. But me, I say there are spots that don't come off, Snape, spots that never come off. Do you know what I mean? By implication, of course, Moody does not believe in second chances. Moody kind of has a zero tolerance policy on, well, dark wizardry. Definitely. Is that particularly relevant in Snape's case? Well, perhaps. We'll, as I say, talk more about that when we get to some big final revelations about Snape's identity and purpose here at Hogwarts. But this is enough, of course, to cast doubt on Snape. Again, we're using Moody as an emotional lever here, right? Moody has been pretty thoroughly established as a good guy. We are on board with Alistair Mad Eye Moody. We believe in him. Harry, most importantly, believes in him. And this is another moment when Moody gets to demonstrate his good guy credentials, right? He knows that Harry is there. We get the lopsided smile that indicates that, yes, in fact, he can still see through invisibility cloaks. That wasn't a one-off deal back in Hogsmeade. This is just a thing. This is a power of which Alistair Moody is possessed. And what does he do with this power? Well, he stands with Harry. He stands on the side of rule breaking, and he roughly and rudely interrogates Snape, questioning the fact that someone has broken into his office and searched it, and acknowledging when Snape accuses him that he too has searched his office. Aura's privilege, Snape, as he says, right? Not Aura's privilege, Professor Snape, not Aura's privilege, Severus, as other characters might address Severus Snape at this point, but no. Mad Eye Moody is absolutely in the narrative voice of the Harry Potter series, in fact, by referring to him pretty consistently just as Snape. So Moody has appeared. He has taken Snape's attention off of Harry lurking on the stairwell there, but we're not quite done yet. Snape had reached out for it, a horrible expression of dawning comprehension on his face. Accio parchment! The map flew up in the air, slipped through Snape's outstretched fingers, and soared down the stairs into Moody's hand. My mistake, Moody said calmly. It's mine. Must have dropped it earlier. But Snape's black eyes were darting from the egg and Filch's arms to the map in Moody's hand, and Harry could tell he was putting two and two together as only Snape could. Potter, he said quietly. What's that? Said Moody calmly, folding up the map and pocketing it. Potter, Snape snarled, and he actually turned his head and stared right at the place where Harry was, as though he could see him. That egg is Potter's egg. That piece of parchment belongs to Potter. I've seen it before. I recognize it. Potter is here. Potter in his invisibility cloak. Snape stretched out his hands like a blind man and began to move up the stairs. Harry could have sworn his overlarge nostrils were dilating, trying to sniff Harry out. Trapped, Harry leaned backward, trying to avoid Snape's fingertips, but any moment now. There's nothing there, Snape, barked Moody. But I'll be happy to tell the headmaster how quickly your mind jumped to Harry Potter. Snape's relationship with Harry, of course, particularly interesting to Dumbledore, and apparently particularly interesting to Alistair Moody too. Moody's intervention here, choosing to pluck the parchment from the fingers of Snape, the Marauder's map here, again cementing his role as a good guy, a guy allied with the forces of righteous rebellion, I suppose, here at Hogwarts, the forces that are seeking to challenge the status quo and move forward and are not entrenched in those traditional power structures in quite the way that Snape is. We, unfortunately, really must keep moving on. Yes, 2 + 2. Potter's doing math around here. Yeah. Yeah, I like that very much, actually. Harry could tell he was putting 2 and 2 together, as only Snape could. It's kind of a running joke on the internet, isn't it? Right? That Harry comes to Hogwarts and he learns care of magical creatures and potions and transmutation and divination and defense against the dark arts, but doesn't actually take a math class. And I don't think for a moment that Harry can't perform this very simple arithmetic. But yes, putting two and two together as only Snape could does suggest that math is this unknowable mystery to Harry Potter, right? He's doing some kind of number magic over there as only Snape can, the perfidious soul that he is. Yeah, I think that's completely unintentional, but it does very much play into the notion that in some ways the kids at Hogwarts are pretty woefully undereducated, it turns out. Good. Wow, this is a very fast chat. Oh, Clambert pointing out Camille Nanjiani has a great joke about this, as Camille Nanjiani has a great joke about pretty much anything. If you've never heard Camille Nanjiani talk about Harry Potter, definitely go look that up. I'm sure there are things available on YouTube that you can go and look up. But yes, Camille is an incredibly talented stand-up performer, and of course, an incredibly talented actor. Because hey, why shouldn't you be, funny and talented and good-looking and successful? Why shouldn't you be all of those things, Camille Nanjiani? It is very well earned in your particular instance, sir. Good. Oh, right. Recyclops is saying, I've always imagined that arithmancy is actually just math and physics, and they don't know that's the magic that Muggles have. is arithmancy math and physics? I mean, it could be, right? I mean, arithmancy is kind of like numerology, right? It's the study of divination through numbers and patterns and kind of the logical progression of certain rhythms. That is one of the real world pseudosciences that could be thought of as arithmancy. We don't actually know how that works in the frame of Harry Potter, but yeah, I kind of like that idea that it's just very simple muggle arithmetic going on in that class. That works rather beautifully for me. Yeah, good. All right, let's wrap up this chapter. In fact, we're making excellent progress. Look at this. Let's wrap up this chapter with Moody asking Harry about the map. Moody took hold of Harry's arms and pulled. Harry's leg came free of the trick step and he climbed onto the one above it. Moody was still gazing at the map. Potter, he said slowly, you didn't happen by any chance to see who broke into Snape's office, did you? On this map, I mean. Yeah, I did, Harry admitted. It was Mr. Crouch. Moody's magical eye whizzed over the entire surface of the map. He looked suddenly alarmed. Crouch, he said. You're sure, Potter? Positive, said Harry. Well, he's not here anymore, said Moody, his eyes still whizzing over the map. Crouch, that's very, very interesting. He said nothing for almost a minute, still staring at the map. Harry could tell that this news meant something to Moody and very much wanted to know what it was. He wondered whether he dared ask. Moody scared him slightly, yet Moody had just helped him avoid an awful lot of trouble. Professor Moody, why do you reckon Mr. Crouch wanted to look around Snape's office? Moody's magical eye left the map and fixed, quivering upon Harry. It was a penetrating glare, and Harry had the impression that Moody was sizing him up, wondering whether to answer or not and how much to tell him. Put it this way, Potter, Moody finally muttered. They say old Mad Eye's obsessed with catching dark wizards, but I'm nothing compared to Barty Crouch. He continued to stare at the map. Harry was burning to know more. When you read this book for the second time, for subsequent times, and you know the turn that is coming, this is one of the lines that stands out most powerfully and most beautifully. It plays absolutely transparently the first time that you read the book. It is not intentionally shadowed with ambiguity in the way that certain elements of the story are already shadowed with ambiguity, right? This is just a flat assertion by Mad-Eye Moody, which plays on its superficial level perfectly. It absolutely speaks to that conspiracy theory fear that is underpinning the events of the Goblet of Fire, right? We're already accustomed to the idea now. It feels like a lifetime ago, but remember the Dark Mark at the Quidditch World Cup, right? Remember the emergence of the Dark Mark and the marauding Death Eaters among the camped wizards there? Remember all of the suspicions that we've seen? Sirius Black's notions that Dumbledore has seen what is unfolding and is taking steps to prevent it? The appointment of Alistair Mad-Eye Moody as the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher for this year, drawing him out of retirement. Even the assault on Mad-Eye Moody himself. That was how we were introduced to the character in the first place, right? And now, of course, the continuing and suspicious absence of Bartemius Crouch from the Ministry of Magic. And I suppose, to a lesser extent, but certainly a compatible extent, the behavior of Ludo Bagman is also weirdly suspicious at this point. In addition to, Snape and Draco and Rita Skeeter and all the other awful characters who populate this book. I noted last time, in fact, that I made some casual remark about Rita Skeeter being the worst person in the world of Harry Potter, and I was rightly chastised for failing to acknowledge the actual worst character, the actual greatest villain in all of Harry Potter, Dolores Umbridge. That's just because I take every opportunity to forget that we have to talk about her in the very near future, in fact. She's vile in a way that makes Rita Skeeter look utterly harmless. She makes Rita Skeeter look like Hagrid is what happens. But we will have plenty of opportunity to talk about Dolores Umbridge when we get there. So all of this plays into our notion of this unfolding conspiracy theory, while also playing into, when we return to this book on a subsequent reading, our understanding of the plot that is moving at this time. More on that as we move into the second task. And of course, the reveal will come when it comes. Let me see. Oh, Gretchen is bowing out early. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us. And Dry Heaving Llamas is chastising me for spoilers. Yeah, I'm stepping around the spoilers because I know that some people are in fact reading this book for the first time along with us, but we are led by the narrative to expect complication here, to expect trickery here. Dark, shadowy forces are moving in the wizarding world at this point while we are distracted by the Triwizard Tournament. I think by this point in the book, we're absolutely comfortable with the idea that both the Quidditch World Cup and the Triwizard Tournament are being staged in order to distract people. This is, as I've said previously, this is bread and circuses happening right here. Terrible things are unfolding. Terrible things are afoot. And lest we forget, this is the book that started with Harry's dream of Voldemort, right? This is the book that began with that shadow spreading out once more across the wizarding world. And we've had proof of the manifestation of that shadow, the power of that shadow in the chapters since then. And that darkness is still building, that shadow still growing all the deeper as we move forward. Let's move into chapter 26, the second task. I'm halfway through right now. I'm halfway through my appointed time. The Triwizard Tournament is just a red heron, says Lady Winter. Very good. Yes, good. Joseph says, none of you have the necessary respect for the pedagogical innovations. Is the second G in pedagogical? I've just realized that I've never pronounced that word out loud. Pedagogery. No, both would be hard G's. Yes, pedagogical innovations of Dolores Umbridge. You know what? You're absolutely right, Joseph. We should pay very close attention to her appearance in this book and to the educational innovations which she is responsible for at Hogwarts. The really cutting edge kind of experimental science of education innovations that she wields there. Yes, good. All right, let's keep going on. As I say, I'm halfway through my time, so we're probably not going to make it all the way to the end of the second task, but let's see how we can do. As we begin chapter 26, the second task, with Harry catching up Ron and Hermione on the events of the night before. This class was an ideal cover for a private conversation, as everyone was having far too much fun to pay them any attention. Harry had been recounting his adventures of the previous night in whispered installments for the last half hour. Snape said Moody searched his office as well, Ron whispered, his eyes alight with interest as he banished a cushion with a sweep of his wand. It soared into the air and knocked Pavarti's hat off. What, do you reckon Moody's here to keep an eye on Snape as well as Karkaroff? Well, I don't know if that's what Dumbledore asked him to do, but he's definitely doing it, said Harry, waving his wand without paying much attention so that his cushion did an odd sort of belly flop off the desk. Moody said Dumbledore only let Snape stay here because he's giving him a second chance or something. What? Said Ron, his eyes widening, his next cushion spinning high into the air, ricocheting off the chandelier and dropping heavily onto Flitwick's desk. Harry, maybe Moody thinks Snape put your name in the Goblet of Fire. Oh, Ron, said Hermione, shaking her head skeptically. We thought Snape was trying to kill Harry before, and it turned out he was saving Harry's life, remember? A little catch-up for those of you who don't recall the end of the first book with exactly what is going on between Snape and Harry at this point. I find this class, and I have no time at all to talk about this, but I find this class in which they are learning the opposite of the Accio spell, right? They are learning this banishment spell that directs things away from you, I suppose, and we get this very amusing conceit that Professor Flitwick has furnished them with large cushions, which are too harmless to do any real damage, even though Neville keeps screwing up the spell. Neville keeps screwing up the spell in a really interesting way, though, right? And accidentally moving things that are much heavier than his cushion. Neville possibly demonstrating a kind of raw and untapped magical power, which is ill-disciplined, but nonetheless present. I really can't take any time to talk about that more fully, but hey, we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk too about Neville Longbottom as we move through the series. But I'm really interested in this idea. The Accio spell takes so much concentration and so much power and is a charm that is hard to master, as we've been told before. But apparently the banishment spell doesn't even have a verbal component. The banishment spell is accomplished just with a flick of the wand that is so casual that our power trio can perform it with moderate success, mixed success, I suppose we can say, while having an urgent whispered conversation about things which are much more pressing. So pressing, in fact, that at the beginning of this passage, Harry says, just forget about the egg, I need to tell you about Moody and Snape. Yeah, we should probably just forget about the egg. After all, the Triwizard Tournament is famously non-lethal, right? The Triwizard Tournament, not dangerous at all. And we've got all the time in the world. We definitely should focus on this apparently unimportant subplot. Harry, thanks for that bit of narrative guidance. Good job, you. I'm fascinated by the banishment spell here that is used, but again, no time as we move through the chapter, the second task here. So Harry takes to the library and continues his research. He sat with Hermione and Ron in the library as the sun set outside, tearing feverishly through page after page of spells, hidden from one another by the massive piles of books on the desk in front of each of them. Harry's heart gave a huge leap every time he saw the word water on a page, but more often than not it was merely, take 2 pints of water, half a pound of shredded mandrake leaves and a newt. I don't reckon it can be done, said Ron's voice flatly from the other side of the table. There's nothing. Closest was that thing to dry up puddles and ponds, that drought charm, but that was nowhere near powerful enough to drain the lake. There must be something, Hermione muttered, moving a candle closer to her. Her eyes were so tired she was poring over the tiny print of old and forgotten bewitchments and charms with her nose about an inch from the page. They'd never have set a task that was undoable. They have, said Ron. Harry, just go down to the lake tomorrow, right? Stick your head in, yell at the merpeople to give back whatever they've nicked and see if they chuck it out. Best you can do, mate. There's a way of doing it, Hermione said crossly. There just has to be. She seemed to be taking the library's lack of useful information on the subject as a personal insult. It had never failed her before. I know what I should have done, said Harry, resting face down on saucy tricks for tricky sorts. I should have learned to be an animagus like Sirius. An animagus was a wizard who could transform into an animal. Yeah, you could have turned into a goldfish any time you wanted, said Ron. Or a frog, yawned Harry. He was exhausted. They're weird. I don't know if this struck any of you as being slightly odd, but the narrative exposition that we get right there at the end, an animagus was a wizard who could transform into an animal. Thanks, narrative voice. A, I could probably have got that from context clues. B, you don't usually go out of your way to offer that kind of just very literal exposition right in the heart of a scene. Usually you will at least obey the formality of having one of the characters explain it to one of the other characters, right? If it wasn't clear from context clues that was the case, then at least Ron could have said, yeah, then you could transform yourself into an animal, just like Sirius does when he transforms into a dog. I mean, it's not deft, it's not dexterous, it's not graceful, but it's also something that we do all the time in the pages of Harry Potter. But I'm puzzled by JKR's decision there to just have the narrative voice break in with this little parenthetical aside. By the way, in case you didn't know, an animagus is a wizard who can transform himself into an animal. Oh, cool. Hermione objects to this plan, of course, and Harry assures her that he is just joking, but we are going to great lengths to establish the fact that we have exhausted, well, everything. Despite the fact that there are clearly going to be a couple of charms that are used in the next couple of pages that will work pretty well, in fact, in getting you to the bottom of the lake so that you can attempt the second task. We do acknowledge the possibility of personal transmutation, and Hermione waves that away because we don't even learn human transmutation until the sixth form, so they have no way of learning that spell and probably insufficient magical skill to cast it even if they could, though that may not be true for Harry, who does seem to be somewhat gifted in this regard. But we have exhausted every possible avenue, and one of the great delights of this chapter, of course, before we even get to the second task, is the abundant naming of magical tomes in the Hogwarts library. We get to it on this slide, of course, old and forgotten bewitchments and charms, which is rather lovely, but I'm a big fan of Saucy Tricks for Tricky Sorts. That's a really good book, you guys. That's a really good book. I kind of just want, don't worry about the history of Quidditch. Don't worry about Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. JKR, if you can write Saucy Tricks for Tricky Sorts, I will definitely buy that book, though it does maybe sound a little more, I don't know, adult than the other books in that series. So we've completely exhausted the possibility of research aiding our hero here. We have tapped ourselves out in the library, though we're not completely done. At this point, Fred and George Weasley show up to take Ron and Hermione away to Professor McGonagall's office, where they will be sequestered for an unknown purpose for an unknown period. But it doesn't matter because Harry goes back to the dormitory, tosses and turns a little bit, then goes back to the library, throwing himself with reckless abandon back into research, believing that there is knowledge out there that can help him, believing, as Hermione does, that the library simply must hold the answer because this is a problem that is afflicting them and they live in the wizarding world. And as we've talked about before, the approach of the wizarding world in general, and Hogwarts in particular, to magic is a ruthlessly scientific one. There must be a specific charm that will do the thing that we need it to do. It is perhaps inconceivable that Harry hasn't learned anything about breathing water or anything about bringing air with him that they can't create some kind of magical workaround. But to be honest, I'm not that surprised by it. I'm not thrown out of the book by it, I suppose is what I mean, because every single spell that we have seen to this point has such specific utility that it may well be that they just haven't encountered a spell of sufficiently specific utility, right? There may be a way of cobbling a couple of spells together, but that may not be reliable and that may not be trustworthy and may not certainly stand up to scrutiny in the context of the second task. And Harry hasn't learned a specific spell yet, but he still believes that there is a specific spell out there. He still believes that there is a truth to be uncovered somewhere in this library because that is the thing that Hogwarts has taught him. More than anything else, Hogwarts has taught him that, oh no, magic is just science. That's all it is. And there must be an answer. This cannot be impossible, no matter what Ron asserts. You just have to find the right key to this particular lock, the right rational key to this particular lock. So there in the library at 2 o'clock in the morning, Harry falls asleep and he dreams and is then awoken by the intrusion of Dobby. The mermaid in the painting in the prefect's bathroom was laughing. Harry was bubbling like a cork in bubbly water next to her rock while she held his firebolt over his head. "Come and get it," she giggled maliciously. "Come on, jump." "I can't," Harry panted, snatching at the firebolt and struggling not to sink. "Give it to me!" But she just poked him painfully on the side with the end of the broomstick, laughing at him. "That hurts! Get off! Ouch! Harry Potter must wake up, sir! Stop poking me! Dobby must poke Harry Potter, sir! He must wake up!" Harry opened his eyes. He was still in the library. The invisibility cloak had slipped off his head as he slept, and the side of his face was stuck to the pages of Where There's a Wand, There's a Way. He sat up, straightening his glasses, blinking in the bright daylight. "Harry Potter needs to hurry," squeaked Dobby. "The second task starts in 10 minutes, and Harry Potter—" "10 minutes," Harry croaked. 10 minutes!" He looked down at his watch. Dobby was right. It was 9:20. A large dead weight seemed to fall through Harry's chest into his stomach. "Hurry, Harry Potter!" squeaked Dobby, plucking at Harry's sleeve. "You're supposed to be down by the lake with the other champions, sir." "It's too late, Dobby," Harry said hopelessly. "I'm not doing the task. I don't know how." "Harry Potter will do the task," squeaked the elf. "Dobby knew Harry had not found the right book, so Dobby did it for him." And Dobby gives to Harry the Gillyweed. This is something else that really reveals itself in subsequent readings of this book, which may be relatively transparent the first time through the book. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into this, but I will gesture toward it in the hope that this is, if this is your second or third or fourth time through Goblet of Fire, that you can appreciate how beautifully this is orchestrated behind the scenes. Of course, this is transformed in the movie version of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where it is Neville Longbottom who gives Harry the information about the Gillyweed. And that is entirely appropriate, right? That is a smart adaptive choice, because Neville is equipped to give Harry that information. If Harry had turned to Neville at this point in the story, there's every reason to believe that Neville would have been equipped to give Harry the same answer as Dobby provides for him. Dobby also, you'll note, overhears the details of the second task in a conversation between Professor McGonagall and Mad-Eye Moody. Mad-Eye Moody just talking about the second task, just as you do, just not worrying about being overheard by a house elf who's probably invisible to normal sight, right? Like a house elf that you probably wouldn't even notice, even if you were possessed of a magical eye that, wait a minute, it is a really beautiful bit of plot construction. And again, the second time that you read through the book, a lot of these incidental details stand out to you. Let's cut ahead to the second task, because I've got, as I say, a lot of slides to cover as we move through the second task itself, and this is good stuff. Though I will note the reappearance of the mermaid in the dream sequence in the previous slide, the reappearance of the mermaid from the prefect's bathroom, of course, the embodiment of that kind of folkloric, Ariel-friendly vision of mermaids, right? This is a mermaid that absolutely has like a singing crab companion and just really wants to be where the people are, right? Yes, that's that mermaid. Though even here, she is maliciously taunting Harry with his firebolt, with the key to the first task, right? He knows that this is not going to help him now, which led to a whole weird kind of thought experiment tangent that I went on earlier today when I spent 20 minutes thinking about the physical mechanics and properties of broomsticks being operated underwater. Would the broomstick not, I mean, obviously you would still have to breathe, but would the broomstick not also help under the water? Is the broomstick not just like a catch-all solution to many of the problems that Harry's going to face through the Triwizard Tournament? Well, maybe, but for narrative reasons, we're going to dispense with the firebolt here. But that's why she's prodding Harry with it. It's with the memory, the physicality of the solution to the first task here in the absence of a possible solution to the second task. That solution, though, as I say, offered by Dobby because he overheard the conversation between Minerva McGonagall and Mad-Eye Moody. And also he passes on the information to Harry that it is his Wheezy that has been taken. It's Ron that has been taken and is the token which Harry is going to have to retrieve from the bottom of the lake. So Harry runs down to the edge of the lake. He arrives just at the last moment. He's panting. He's got a stitch. He's got his hands on his knees, just kind of needs an orange slice and some Gatorade to like get his wind back. And then Ludo Bagman lines them up at the edge of the lake, calls time, and they all begin their journey. Harry stuffs the Gillyweed into his mouth and finds that he sprouts gills, leaps into the water. And we get actually what is a beautiful description about leaping into the water and the flood of oxygen through his body and how the water now feels cool and he feels buoyant and he's at home here. It's really quite beautifully written. But this is as he starts to swim. Small fish flickered past him like silver darts. Once or twice he thought he saw something larger moving ahead of him, but when he got nearer he discovered it to be nothing but a large blackened log or a dense clump of weed. There was no sign of any of the other champions, merpeople, Ron, nor, thankfully, the giant squid. Light green weed stretched ahead of him as far as he could see, 2 feet deep like a meadow of very overgrown grass. Harry was staring unblinkingly ahead of him, trying to discern shapes through the gloom, and then, without warning, something grabbed hold of his ankle. Harry twisted his body around and saw a Grindylow, a small horned water demon, poking out of the weed. Its long fingers clutched tightly around Harry's leg, its pointed fangs bared. Harry stuck his webbed hand quickly inside his robes and fumbled for his wand. By the time he had grasped it, 2 more Grindylows had risen out of the weed and had seized handfuls of Harry's robes and were attempted to drag him down. "Relatio!" Harry shouted, except that no sound came out. A large bubble issued from his mouth, and his wand, instead of sending sparks at the Grindylows, pelted them with what seemed to be a jet of boiling water, for where it struck them, angry red patches appeared on their green skin. Harry pulled his ankle out of the Grindylows' grip and swam as fast as he could, occasionally sending more jets of hot water over his shoulder at random. Every now and then he felt one of the Grindylows snatch at his foot again, and he kicked out, hard. Finally he felt his foot connect with a horned skull, and looking back saw the dazed Grindylow floating away, cross-eyed, while its fellows shook their fists at Harry and sank back into the weed. We've seen Grindylows before, of course. Weirdly, I had this memory. This might have come from the movie, but I didn't have time to look it up. But I have a memory of Grindylows being referenced in Chamber of Secrets, though they are not. They actually appear in Prisoner of Azkaban, when they're introduced by Professor Lupin, and then used as a means of critiquing Professor Lupin's educational skills by Professor Snape, when Hermione points out that is as far as they've gotten in their defense against the dark arts classes here. They are also, again, another weird thing that stands out to me, right? Harry twisted his body around and saw a Grindylow, a small horned water demon poking out of the weed. Demon feels like a word that is larger than its intended purpose here, right? And in their first appearance back in Prisoner of Azkaban, Grindylows are also referred to as water demons. Professor Lupin calls them water demons. And in fact, in the span of the Harry Potter saga, Grindylows and Kelpies and other water creatures are the only things that are referred to as demons. Which feels like, I don't know, that feels again like an oddly kind of a theologically charged word, and if not theologically charged, then at least metaphorically and folklorically charged word, like narratively charged word that isn't quite necessary here. It seems to be a description, right? The fangs and the claws and the horns. It seems as though the word demon here is used to reflect a demonic appearance in the more kind of conventional understanding of that word. But yeah, it's odd that they're the only things that stand out as demons themselves in the span of the Harry Potter series. Harry also recklessly sending jets of boiling hot water behind him as he's swimming through the lake. I mean, he doesn't know where the other champions are, and I'm starting to wonder if the tasks themselves are not the only things that are responsible for, the mortality rate among Triwizard Tournament champions over the years. Just sending jets of boiling hot water hither and yon, beyond sight. I mean, he says specifically that he can't see very far through the gloom, right? And he's sending them at random behind him, trying to ward off the Grindylows. Maybe they don't travel that far. Maybe they're not that powerful. Maybe they wouldn't hurt a human being that much. Or maybe they would. Maybe they would. It feels a little bit reckless, yes. But Harry manages through skill and wit to evade the Grindylows. Oh, I did want to talk about relatio, I guess as we're pronouncing it here, the revulsion jinx, as it will later be known. This probably comes to us from the French verb relâcher, meaning to release or to set free, or the Italian word relatio, which is pronounced the same way, R-I-L-A-S-C-I-O in the Italian form, meaning I release. This is a minor charm, and like many of the minor charms in Harry Potter, this is its first appearance. We're going to see it pop up a few more times, and then it's going to be all over the place in Deathly Hallows, right? We get, I guess, more spells per page in the Deathly Hallows than we do in any of the other books in the series, so we'll see Relatio come back later. Excellent. All right, let's... Oh, interesting. C-Star says, Gillyweed, I haven't had a chance to scuba dive since 2013. I've dived a total of 5 times, counting my certification in 2003, and I'm forever bitterly disappointed by this inability to explore underwater. Wow, that's fascinating. I have never been scuba diving, never used an aqualung, not even if I could Oxio one, despite Hermione's protestations. I've never spent a lot of time doing stuff like that because, of course, I grew up in Scotland where you don't want to spend a lot of time in the water anyway, let me tell you, because even at the height of summer, it is utterly, utterly frigid. I lived on the northeast coast of Scotland, there on the banks of the Murray Firth. So basically it is the North Sea, right? The currents that carry into the Murray Firth are Arctic currents. So it really doesn't matter how warm the weather is, which parenthetically never gets that warm in northeast Scotland anyway. So even though I grew up, I've spent most of my life very, very close to the beach. In fact, I can firmly recommend the beaches of Burghead and Rose Isle and Spey Bay and Hopeman out there on the coast of the Murray Firth. I spent a lot of time on beaches growing up and spent very, very little time in the water. Someday I would love to. I don't have a fear of the water, as I know a lot of people have. Though I will admit to having an irrational fear of very large things in the water. Like, I can imagine swimming in like open water and feeling very good. And I can imagine swimming in open water with fish and, I don't know, dolphins. And even like sharks wouldn't necessarily like frighten me, but just knowing that there is a whale in the same body of water as me, even if it's, thousands of miles away from me at that moment. Whales are too big, you guys. They're just too damn big. And I can appreciate them from the shore. I can appreciate them, leaping over a boy who's standing on a seawall so that they can escape to freedom. That kind of, conventional whale behavior, the kind of thing that whales do 4 times a day, right? Leaping over boys to escape from captivity, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I don't think that I would want to be in an open body of water if there was anything that large nearby. That's kind of where I am with that. That was a weird tangent to take in the middle of a Harry Potter podcast, but here we are. Becca saying whales are nice, sharks are very scary though. No, I completely accept that whales are lovely. Like it's not that I am fearful of the whale, it's that I am made profoundly uncomfortable by the whale, right? That disparity in scale, there is something to my mind, and I may be completely alone in this, but there is something inhuman in that disparity of scale, right? It's not just that it is large, and it's not just that it is much larger than I am. It is that things within the human frame of reference should not be that large. There's a tickle at the back of my head when I think about being in the water alongside a whale, which also, right, if I'm in the water alongside like the hull of a giant cruise ship or something like that, right, I can also imagine feeling that way. But it tickles that same part of the back of my head that I get when I read like Lovecraft stories and things of, unfathomable cosmic horror. That feels like unfathomable cosmic horror. Whales, unfathomable cosmic horror, and pretty damn Lovecraftian. If you're in the water with them, if you're not in the water with them, I'm all pro whale. Let me assure you. Let's keep going. Let's get to the Mer song. Segue out of this weird tangent where I found myself. He swam on for what felt like at least 20 minutes. He was passing over vast expanses of black mud now, which swirled murkily as he disturbed the water. Then at long last he heard a snatch of haunting Mer song. An hour long you'll have to look and to recover what we took. Harry swam faster and soon saw a large rock emerge out of the muddy water ahead. It had paintings of mer people on it. They were carrying spears and chasing what looked like the giant squid. Harry swam on past the rock, following the Mer song. Your times have gone, so tarry not, lest what you seek stays here to rot. A cluster of crude stone dwellings stained with algae loomed suddenly out of the gloom on all sides. Here and there at the dark windows, Harry saw faces that bore no resemblance at all to the painting of the mermaid in the prefect's bathroom. The mer people had greyish skin and long, wild, dark green hair. Their eyes were yellow, as were their broken teeth, and they wore thick ropes of pebbles around their necks. They leered at Harry as he swam past. One or two of them emerged from their caves to watch him better, their powerful silver fishtails beating the water, spears clutched in their hands. The depiction of mer people, as I said earlier, completely at odds with our expectation, not just our native expectation coming to Harry Potter having seen The Little Mermaid, but also the native expectation which is aroused within us by the depiction of mermaids earlier in this book, in fact. That dissonance created here by J.K. Rowling is really quite beautifully done. I'm really quite impressed by it, as I am impressed by this pretty horrifying description. And it's horrifying not only because they are physically repulsive, right? Their eyes were yellow, as were their broken teeth. They wore long ropes of pebbles around their neck, grayish skin with long, wild, dark green hair. This is pretty troubling. This is pretty inhuman. But what stands out most to me is this detail of art. Harry swam faster and soon saw a large rock emerge out of the muddy water ahead. It had paintings of mer people on it. They were carrying spears and chasing what looked like the giant squid. Harry swam on past the rock following the mer song, right? Once again, we have been casually introduced to another race of sapient creatures here within the wizarding world, like goblins, like house elves, like centaurs. The mer people they are not animals. They are clearly a sapient community. They have houses and clothing and tools, right? The spears are at the very least tools, if not outright weapons. They have culture. They have art, physical art, visual art, and they have the songs themselves. They have language. This is not necessarily what we were expecting when we came into this story, or came into this part of the story, I should say. It's, spears for catching fish, says Raven Darkholm, and perhaps there are tribes who might battle for territory. Perhaps, and certainly, right, the presence of the giant squid. There's a giant squid who lives in this lake, and the mer people battle him, so spears would be pretty necessary right off the bat, I would imagine, right? You'd want to do that. Yeah. Merfolk are awesome, says the wonderful Becca Ella. They don't need human approval. They look great to each other. Absolutely fair, right? Absolutely fair. This is another one of these points where we transition so casually into another culture that it almost feels as though the book doesn't want us to pay attention to it, and yet we have the detail of art and we have the detail of clothing, right? The strings of pebbles worn around their bodies, those are presumably not primarily protective. That's presumably not armor, right? That must be decorative. It must bespeak art and must bespeak culture and must bespeak society. They have community. They have art. They have songs. They have presence here. They have recognizable homes and, yes, a communal identity. This is very much like our introduction to the Centaurs, I would argue, earlier in the series. Yeah. Oh, I said right at the beginning that the only alternate title for tonight's session was The Shape of Water, and Clambert has just offered in the Crowdcast chat here The Snape of Water and sent Wilhelm Scream running off to Photoshop a poster. So check back. If I see that poster before this podcast goes live, then check the show notes for that poster, I guess, if that thing should show up. The Snape of Water. That's pretty horrifying, actually. That's not great. I don't really want a weird cryptozoological love story featuring Severus Snape. I don't want that thing. Even Severus Snape, played by the estimable Doug Jones, who is just wonderful. Yeah. Good. All right. Let me see as I catch up still further. Sarah saying, so the lake is apparently big enough to support a full society. How did the merfolk get there in the first place? Was the lake once connected to the ocean? Possibly, actually. It may possibly be connected to the ocean. This is true of Sarah, because, of course, we're referring to this as a lake. It is not really a lake. It is a loch. We are in Scotland here. We are in the Highlands of Scotland here. So it is a loch. And many of the lochs in that part of the world in real life are connected by underground rivers, I suppose, underground passages to the open sea. That is one of the possible explanations, if you're into this kind of conspiracy theory, that is one of the possible explanations for the appearance and disappearance of the Loch Ness Monster, right? Nessie comes and goes in and out of Loch Ness because there is a passageway deep within the depths of Loch Ness out to the open water. That is verifiably true in the case of certain lochs. I don't know that it is verifiably true in the case of Loch Ness specifically, and even if it were, I'm not sure that's a real explanation for the presence/absence of Nessie there, and the thriving tourism industry, which has spawned up, particularly if you go to Drumnadrochit, which is like halfway between Inverness at the northern end of Loch Ness and Fort William at the Fort Augustus rather at the bottom end of Loch Ness, right halfway along, right at Urquhart Castle, which is the castle that you see if anyone posts any pictures of Loch Ness, you'll see Urquhart Castle there, which is well worth the visit, I might say. But like a mile inland from that, you reach the village of Drumnadrochit, which is basically Nessie Central. If you want to buy any object crafted by human hands over the course of the last 2,000 years with a little Nessie on it, that's the place to go, let me tell you. So it is possible that the merfolk have their own way in and out of this particular lake. It is also possible that this is just a isolated community. I don't know how many merfolk there are living in the lake, and we don't know how large the lake is. We never get like dimensions of the lake itself, but it's entirely possible that it could be miles and miles long and even miles and miles deep, right? I believe I have heard it asserted that Loch Ness is unfathomably deep. I don't want to give an actual number because I'm not at all sure that I remember that correctly, but very deep indeed. And certainly you'll note that it has taken Harry half of his allotted time to swim to the merfolk village here, right? To arrive at the hostages. That's the song that we get. An hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what you took. Your time's half gone, so tarry not, lest what you seek stays here to rot. And maybe to like reflect back on the ambiguity that I mentioned earlier with regard to the song, maybe that ambiguity is somewhat diminished here with the assertion that so tarry not lest what you seek stays here to rot, but it is possible that what you seek represents kind of symbolically not the actual person that is being sought here, but victory. But again, right, hope and possibility for the future. There's still enough wiggle room that no one here is like technically lying, I suppose. No one here is saying, hey, Harry, you'd better hurry up. I'm looking at my watch and it's about 30 minutes till Ron being dead time, right? It's 30 minutes to the death of your friend's o'clock, which would be really bad. Let's get into a discussion of the hostages. This may be our last, actually. This may be our last primary. Oh my gosh. There we go. It has been photoshopped. That is utterly terrifying. That is utterly terrifying. That's just not a good thing that I want to see. Gosh. Oh, someone's already done it. Wilhelm is just linking to it. I see. Okay. So this is a joke that is made by Screen Junkies over on Twitter. I will try to remember to include the link to that tweet. That's pretty good. Visual design may not be exactly what we want it to be, but it's okay. Someone can do some really skillful typography, I'm sure. Let's get into our discussion of the hostages then. And as I say, this may well be our last slide that we cover tonight. A whole crowd of mer people was floating in front of the houses that lined what looked like a mer version of a village square. A choir of mer people was singing in the middle, calling the champions towards them. And behind them rose a crude sort of statue, a gigantic mer person hewn from a boulder. 4 people were bound tightly to the tail of the stone mer person. Ron was tied between Hermione and Cho Chang. There was also a girl who looked no older than 8, whose clouds of silvery hair made Harry feel sure that she was Fleur Delacour's sister. All 4 of them appeared to be in a very deep sleep. Their heads were lolling onto their shoulders, and fine streams of bubbles kept issuing from their mouths. Harry sped toward the hostages, half expecting the merpeople to lower their spears and charge at him, but they did nothing. The ropes of weed tying the hostages to the statue were thick, slimy, and very strong. For a fleeting second, he thought of the knife Sirius had given him for Christmas, locked in his trunk in a castle a quarter of a mile away, no use to him whatsoever. He looked around. Many of the merpeople surrounding him were carrying spears. He swam swiftly toward a 7-foot-tall merman with a long green beard and a choker of shark fangs, and tried to mime a request to borrow the spear. The merman laughed and shook his head. "We do not help," he said in a harsh, croaky voice. The opposite here, I suppose. Sirius's knife would be the opposite of Chekhov's gun, right? If Chekhov's gun is on, if the gun is on stage in the first act, then it is absolutely guaranteed to go off by the third, right? Sirius's knife is present on Christmas morning and then of no further use in the second task, at least. That might be a useful term that we can use moving through the rest of the Harry Potter series, honestly, where a lot of things are brought up and then discarded before they might be put to their most obvious narrative use here. So we can talk more about mer culture here under the water, right? We have the sense not just that it is a community, but it is a village. It is a village with a village square, and village squares are interesting because they are innately communal spaces. That is why you have a village square, is to provide space for the community to engage in communal activities. We have the choir, not just merfolk singing individually here, but an actual choir that has been orchestrated. And again, more physical art. In this instance, a gigantic sculpture of a mer person that has been hewn from a boulder. Hewn, a word only used in the carving of sculpture or in the carving of dwarven cities, I suppose, if you've been reading your J.R.R. Tolkien lately. But what stands out most powerfully here is, of course, the identity of the hostages. And I am a little hesitant here. I'm a little hesitant to gloss this too quickly, because I think that a quick gloss may yield some problematic elements within the selection of the hostages here, but also I'm not sure that I have time to do a deeper gloss. So let's try the quick gloss with the understanding that this is actually pretty powerful and pretty compelling, right? Because we have to remember, and this is what we'll circle back around to, we have to remember the point of this test, the point of the hostages themselves. So Ron has been selected. Ron is Harry's hostage here. That is to say that Harry is Ron's champion. The two have been best friends now for 4 years. They share a bond that is pretty unbreakable, even though it has recently been tested. That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense that Ron should be representative of Harry's emotional investment in this particular context, right? Then we have Fleur Delacour's sister, Gabrielle, who is... Well, okay, first off, is Fleur's sister. So that strong, that strong familial bond there absolutely does for Fleur what Ron's friendship and camaraderie and quasi-familial status does for Harry. These two things absolutely work for me, though there is a big question mark for me over Gabrielle's presence here in the first place. We know from some math that is offered to us in the pages of the Deathly Hallows that at this point in the narrative, Gabrielle Delacour is 8 years old. So I'm not sure what she's doing here. I'm not sure why she is a part of the Beauxbaton delegation, unless, of course, schooling at Beauxbaton starts much earlier than schooling at Hogwarts does. We don't necessarily know that Beauxbaton starts at the age of 11 in the same way as Hogwarts. Perhaps in France, if indeed that is where Beauxbaton is, perhaps in that particular tradition, at that particular school, you can get a more developed education. This is an open question. I suppose it's an open question with a slapdash post-it note answer over it, right? Many people have asked J.K. Rowling what happens to wizards, pure-blood wizards, even before they go to Hogwarts, and whether or not they have any kind of conventional schooling, and the answer is no, they do not. There is no such thing as a wizarding elementary school or a wizarding primary school in Britain, at least. Wizards either go to Muggle primary schools, which seems potentially disastrous, at least, or they are homeschooled. They are home educated either by their families or by tutors. That is canonically the educational history of the Weasley clan. In fact, all of the kids were educated at home by Molly, which would have been a wonderful thing, I'm sure. A pretty idyllic educational experience, I'm certain, there under the auspices of Molly Weasley. So, all of this is to say that we have Ron on the one hand and we have Gabrielle Delacour on the other, and those two make a lot of sense for me. But you'll note that in order to motivate the other two male champions, we've just picked their dates from the Yule Ball. We have picked Hermione Granger for Victor Crumb, and we have picked Cho Chang for Cedric Diggory. And that seems like a push to me. That seems a little flat. I would have expected, I would have been primed to seek something more emotionally significant and more emotionally resonant than the girl that you have at most been dating for, what, 6 weeks at this point? This is the girl that you took to the ball, but were they selected at that point then in the preparations for the second task because, Victor asked Hermione and Cedric asked Cho and they all went together and danced their first dance and it was all beautiful and idyllic and wonderful? Is that the point at which both Hermione and Cho were picked for their role in the second task, or was it more recent than that? At what point was this decision made? And is a teenage emotional entanglement, is a teenage romance even assuming, right? Take the most charitable introduction here and say that, yes, Victor and Hermione are falling rapidly in love, or at the very least, Victor is falling rapidly in love with Hermione, or however he pronounces her name, and that Cedric is equally falling rapidly in love with Cho Chang, despite the fact that the age disparity in both of those relationships is not insignificant when you are this age, right? The difference between 17 and 14 is absolutely not insignificant. But that aside, are we to assume that these romantic relationships are simply the most urgent emotional relationships that any of these characters have? Is there no one in Hufflepuff that Cedric has been friends with for years? Could we not have used Hannah Abbott or Ernie Macmillan or Justin Finch Fletchley? Could we not have picked someone that he has known for more than 6 weeks in order to motivate that emotional circumstance here? Could we not have used a sibling? Could we not have created a sibling for the narrative purposes of this? Could we not have chosen someone from Durmstrang? Again, a brother obviously would have been the right choice and would have reflected very nicely on the choice of Ron for Harry too, right? If we have 3 familial connections, and there's Ron Weasley, that actually would have said something really nice about Harry's relationship with Ron. Instead, we get 2 familial or quasi-familial relationships, and then 2 adolescent, hormonally charged romantic relationships. And those aren't the same things. Those just aren't the same things. And I think, for me personally, that the narrative drops the ball here. The narrative, in its defense, seems roundly disinterested in Cho and in Hermione, or at least roundly disinterested in Cho from the perspective of Cedric Diggory. It's actually quite interested in Cho from the perspective of Harry Potter, of course, and his personal connection to Hermione kind of justifies her inclusion too. And maybe that is the argument, right? Maybe that is the resolution to the problem here, is that J.K. Rowling just wasn't interested in what was motivating Victor Krum and Cedric Diggory at this point. What she wants is something that will motivate Harry. So we have Ron and Hermione. We have basically, to all intents and purposes, his brother and sister. We have the girl that he has a pretty wicked crush on. And then we have an innocent girl. We have someone who is far too young to be caught up in all of this. Not just innocent by virtue of her age too, but innocent because of her Beauxbatonness, I suppose, right? Because of her innate elegance and beauty, I suppose, that Vila blood in part, but also like the cultural association of Beauxbaton that Gabrielle is, to Harry's mind, I'm sure, to be protected in exactly the same way as he is demonstrably through the course of the book, slightly more chivalrous to Fleur than he is to other characters, right? He's pretty dismissive of most of the Gryffindor girls, for example, right? And outright disparaging of many of the Slytherin girls. But he always seems to be a little more courteous toward Fleur than we might expect Harry to be, given the circumstances. So those are our hostages, and that is the heart of the emotional pressure that we're applying to each of our champions at this point. We're going to preserve the rescue, though, for next week's reading. We actually made a lot more progress than I thought. I only have 3 slides left to go. So next week, we are going to wrap up with the end of chapter 26. And let me just very quickly skip through the other slides that I had. There we are. Next session, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the very end of chapter 26, plus chapters 27 and 28, Padfoot returns, and the madness of Mr. Crouch. That will be another evening session next week, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, on April the 17th, 2018. I hope you will be able to join me for that session too. I have just a couple of minutes left, so let me see here and I'll take some questions, because we've got 10 questions in the question bucket. All right, here we go. Taking a deep breath. Let's do this thing. Sailor Melissa saying, I don't think Harry's reaction to save everyone was too out of line. The champion faces the threat of death, so could this apply to others? If this doesn't come up in the chat, do we think the other champions would have left the other people had they been there first, or do we think they know the others would be safe, so it was okay to do so? We definitely believe... Okay, we can't generalize out utterly, I suppose. It is clear that Fleur believes that Gabrielle is in trouble. She does not believe that this is going to resolve peaceably at the end of the task, which makes sense because, again, if we're leveraging that emotional intensity, then by God, we're going to leverage that emotional intensity. It's It's a cruel practical joke to play on these champions, honestly, to make them believe that their loved ones could die at the bottom of the lake. But yes, that does seem to be the case. Would the others have left? Would the other champions have left the other hostages behind? It's a really tricky one. It's a really tricky one. And intuitively, I want to say yes. Fleur would have left the others behind. Victor would have left the others behind. Cedric, I'm honestly not sure. I think that Cedric would have found himself caught between his Hufflepuffian instinct to preserve the happiness of others and to serve, which is something that we often associate with Hufflepuff kids. But Hufflepuff kids are also bound by like duty and faithfulness, and the rules are interesting. And I wanted to talk about this actually in the context of Cedric passing on the information about the egg to Harry and the way in which, remember, Harry tells Cedric, it's going to be dragons. Like, just FYI, it's going to be dragons, so you know. And Cedric takes this very circuitous route toward leading Harry toward the truth contained within the egg. Take a bath, just relax and mull it over. Use the prefix bathroom. You're not going to be disturbed there. Take a long bath is what I'm saying, and just kind of figure it out. Take a bath. That's probably a fine thing to do. He doesn't say, hold the egg underwater and open it and you'll be able to hear the song properly, which, by the way, you could probably do in a bucket of water in the Gryffindor common room, right? It wouldn't be that hard to engineer a solution for this. Cedric sidesteps the actual requirement of the Triwizard Tournament because Hufflepuffs, generally speaking, are rule followers. Hufflepuffs observe, because of their virtues of duty and of faithfulness and of trust, Hufflepuffs, I would argue, are more inclined to follow the rules than any other house at Hogwarts. Gryffindors are exempt from that necessity because they're just courageous and willful and take action. Slytherins don't care about the rules in the first place. Rules are there to be subverted, to limit others so that you can circumvent the rules and gain an upper hand, gain an advantage over others. That's the ruthlessly ambitious part of the Slytherin makeup there. And Ravenclaws, I think, abstractly, intellectually, would just be disinterested in rules because, well, the great gift / curse of the very rational mind, of the very geeky mind, is the ability to create special cases and loopholes where, well, obviously that's the rule, but the rule was never meant to encompass this particular. I know I'm not supposed to go outside on a Tuesday, but there's nothing in the rule book that says that I can't go outside on a Tuesday if I'm wearing blue shoes, and I'm clearly wearing blue shoes. Therefore, the rule doesn't apply to me. Hufflepuffs, I think, are rule followers. That is the only thing that makes me question Cedric Diggory. That is the only thing that makes me wonder if Cedric would have stayed true to the rules that have been placed upon him by the Triwizard Tournament, right? Would he have then returned to the shore and been absolutely outraged that these other children had been endangered? Yes, I do think that he would have been furious about it. But no, Harry breaks the rules because that's just Harry, right? That's what Harry does. Okay, let's maybe take one more question before we wrap up here. Oh my gosh, this is a big one. This is also from Sailor Melissa. Silly question, says Melissa. There are no silly questions. There are just ill-formed and ignorant answers from me in the Dear Mr. Potter series. Silly question, says Melissa. Would Accio work on people? I mean, again, right? I only have an intuitive answer to offer. I would say no. I would say that no, it wouldn't. But I'm not quite sure why I feel that way. I mean, innately, I would think that if you were trying to Accio a person, that person would get, like in D&D parlance, would get like a will saving throw, right? You'd get to roll against it to see if you can resist it and take half damage. What do we know about Accio? Well, we know that Accio is not necessarily bounded by specific nouns. We know that Accio is not actually necessarily bounded by the use of a noun at all. We will see later in the series people just Accioing and getting the thing that they want, even though they don't name it specifically. It is not bound by sight. It is not bound by, well, immediate distance. At least that is to say that Harry is able to Accio his firebolt from the castle itself, of course, during the first task. Can we use it to Accio people? I would say not. And my kind of most objective kind of rationalist argument against why it wouldn't work is sentience and agency. We treat the overwhelming of another individual's agency as the worst thing, right? Think of the unforgivable curses, right? The claiming of another's agency and the subversion of that agency, or the domination of that agency, is one of the worst things that we can do in the wizarding world. And it's also, by extension of that, one of the most difficult things to do in the wizarding world. And I just don't think that a simple charm like Accio would do it. That's my immediate response. I don't know that I have a more developed answer than that for you, Melissa. I'm terribly sorry to say, but maybe there is a better answer out there. Maybe that has been answered by J.K. Rowling somewhere. Maybe there's a Pottermore article on it. But to the best of my knowledge and from my perspective, my understanding of how magic works in the wizarding world, I would say no. Anything that isn't an object, anything that has agency, and I would extend that to include, right, owls and familiars, for example. Can you Accio Hedwig? Well, no, probably not. I don't think that would work. And not least of all because it would be probably very destructive to the Axioed individual, right? That probably wouldn't work out terribly well, yeah. Let me see. Let's take one more very quick question here from Mel. Was there any indication that the judges or crowd knew what was going on during the task, or were they judging on the Mer Chieftainess's words on the events and the time limit? The latter, actually. It does seem when we get to the awarding of points in just a couple of slides' time, it does in fact seem that no, they were just watching the surface of the water, I guess. They were just waiting for someone to emerge, I suppose, which I can believe is a very like high pressure environment. Waiting for that to happen would be pretty exciting. But yeah, I don't think that they are able to pierce the veil of the water because the situation just has to be explained too much by the time that we get back. And the intervention of the Mer Chieftainess there too, I think suggests that is in fact the case. Guys, that I think is going to do it for this evening. Yes, I'm absolutely at time. And we have to wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining me this week. This was a really fun session. I'm very much looking forward to next week's session too. We will spend a long time, I'm sure, going over the awarding of the points and the first thawing of Fleur Delacour, right? We get to it. I'm so glad because she's been a little difficult to like in the book thus far, but we get the first kind of real humanity and warmth from Fleur, and there's lots more to look forward to as we get to Padfoot Returns and the Madness of Mr. Crouch. That's the very end of chapter 26, then chapters 27 and 28. Next Tuesday evening, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. That's April the 17th, 2018. Thank you all so much for joining me, particularly those of you who were joining me for the first time ever. I hope you had a good time here in the chat. It's sometimes pretty hard to keep up with the chat during the live session. So I know a lot of people join for the live session, keep up with the chat, and then go back and listen to the podcast afterward because, it's very easy to miss what I'm saying when people are being actually brilliant in the chat and making cogent and insightful points there. But all the same, it's lovely to have you all here. Lovely to spend my Tuesday evening in your company. I will talk to you all again very soon. Until then, mischief managed. Good night, all.